In this video, we're going to create the cocoa bag that will go with the rest of our candy bar ad. We're going to begin by creating a free image plane. Holding down the space bar, going to create free image plane. I'm going to go to the attributes by clicking on the tab or hitting Control A. And I'm going to follow the image name through the folder out to COCOABAG template. And I'll open it. Hitting F on the keyboard, I'm going to drop the alpha gain to 0.5. This will add some translucence to the template if we want to be able to see our geometry through it. I want the bottom of the bag, which is the bottom of the art in the template, to be against the XZ axes. I'll go to my front view and I'll drag it up so that it rests on the x-axis. Now we'll need to duplicate this and rotate it minus 90 degrees. Hitting Command or Control D on the keyboard, I'll go to the channel box, and on the y-axis I'll rotate it minus 90 degrees. I'll want to line it up so that the pink side view is against the edge of the yellow front view. Now that my templates are where I'd like them to be, I'm going to marquee select both, and over in the layer window in the channel box, I'll click on the little blue ball with the white plane, double click on layer name, and name it template. I'll save. And in the empty blue box to the right of the letter P in the layer, I'll click twice to get R for restriction. If I deselect and I attempt to select or move that, it remains stationary. Now we're ready to begin modeling the box. I'm going to go to my front view and I'm going to hold down the space bar, create polygon primitives cube. I'll drag the footprint of the front of the bag, and then I'll return to the perspective view, and I'll drag the thickness out. I can now turn the template off. It's going to be an open bag, so I'm going to get rid of the polyplane on top by right-clicking, choosing face, selecting that face, and choosing delete. Before I model the bag any further, I'm going to generate a UV map for the texture. I'll start by clicking on Delete by Type History, centering the pivot, and I'm going to click on Freeze Transform. Freeze Transform assures me that my texture UV map will fit the contour of the model. I'll right-click on the geometry, choose Assign New Material. I'll go to Arnold, AI Standard Surface, and I'll name it. And I'm going to drop the specular weight to 0. Now I'm going to put the checkerboard pattern on by going to the Color tab, clicking on the checker at the end of the slider, and choosing Checker. If you don't see the checkerboard readily available, you would right-click inside your viewport and hit 6 on the keyboard and it'll show up. There's one last step to generate the UV map. With my geometry selected, I'll hold down the space bar. Going to UV, I'll click on Automatic. You'll see 6 planes around your geometry, and the checkerboard pattern will be evenly distributed with the pattern perfect squares of white and black. I'm going to go to the UV editor now to sew this together. If you don't see any of your tools on your dock, hold down Command or Control Shift, and in this instance, to get the UV map, I'll go to UV at the top of the interface, and I'll click on UV Editor. If you have more than one, you can always right-click and choose Delete. I'll return to my object mode, and with my geometry selected, I'll access the UV Editor. And now I can see I've got the pieces that match the proportions of the faces in our geometry. I'll need to sew these together. Now if you're starting fresh and you don't have the tools available on this dock inside the UV editor, you'd need to go to View and click on Custom Shelf. That will allow us to add the tools we want here. And I can also delete tools from this the same way by right-clicking and choosing Delete. Now we're going to use Move and Sew. And the Move and Sew is under Cut and Sew in the UV editor, down towards the bottom. If I wanted to add it to the dock, just as I add tools to the dock of the user interface, I would hold down Command or Control Shift, and in this instance I'd go to Cut and Sew and click on Move and Sew. I'll right-click over one of the shells and choose Edge. And as I roll over them, you can see the corresponding edge in your geometry as red. When you click on that, you can click on the Move and Sew and it will put them together and create a seam. I'm going to do that with all the sides. I'll select the next one and I can click on Move and Sew, or I can hit G on the keyboard. And now I'll put the bottom on one of the bottom edges of the shell. I'll right-click inside the shell, choose UV shell, select it, and I'll move it into the quadrant where the checkerboard appears, and then I'll scale it, hitting R on the keyboard, to fit inside the checkerboard pattern. I'll hit F on the keyboard to get a little closer, and I'll right-click and go back to my object mode in my viewport, deselecting and then reselecting my geometry. I can now save the UV map. Going to Image, UV Snapshot, I'll browse to my source image folder, and I'll name my file, and I'll save, clicking on Apply and Close. We'll make the bag texture once the modeling process is done. Now we'll be using the Bevel tool and the Edge Loop tool. I'll right-click on my geometry, and at the top I'll choose Edge, and I'll select all the edges with the exception of the top. Hitting 4 on the keyboard, I can confirm that they are blue in out of the selection. I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, I'll go to Bevel, and I'll go to the Attributes. And now I'm going to change the width to maybe 0.15 to see if it works. And the segments are 2. I'll hit Return once I've made these changes. I'll hit Apply to keep the window up to see if that's what I want. And the bevel's too extreme. So I'll Z it out. I'll return to the bevel editor and I'll make it 0.05. Hitting Return to set it, I'll hit Apply. Now we're going to go in and add more faces very sparingly using the Edge Loop tool. I've got my Edge Loop tool on the dock, but if it weren't there, I could hold down Command and Shift and go to Mesh Tools, and there's Insert Edge Loop. Now there's one other thing I need to do. Like the candy box, I want to be able to drop 4 consecutive lines horizontally and vertically to start the modeling process. I'll go to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop, and I'll go to the Attributes. And I'll make sure that equal distance from edges checked off, and then multiple edges. I'll number the edges 4. I'll click on the vertical, and then I'll click on one of the horizontals. If I hit 4 on the keyboard, now I have some basic geometry to work with. Next, we need to add 3 edges to the sides of the package. We're looking to put the creases that we would see here and on the other side. To do that, I'm going to change the settings of my Insert Edge Loop tool by going to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Tool, and I'll hit the reset on it. Now I'll go into my side view of my package, and I'll put a single edge to split it in half, and then I'll put one on either side very, very close. This will allow us to crease it. I'm going to return to my perspective view. Now, in order to get the proper crease, we need to construct edges in a triangle fashion at the bottom of each of these. I'm going to go to the upper right-hand corner of the user interface, and there's a tool that looks like a hammer and a cube. When I click on it, it gives me a tool menu in my attribute window. We're going to use the multi-cut tool. When we click and select the multi-cut tool in the attributes, the attribute option window appears. I'm changing the snap from the default 10 to 1. That will give us more control over where we place the edges. We're going to split these two faces into equal triangles. Clicking on the multi-cut, I'll go to the point on the outside edge here of the 3 that we put in vertically, and I'll go to the lower right corner of that face and not beyond. You'll see a brown line. When you hit return, it will set it. I'll do the same thing on the other side. Clicking on the upper right hand corner of that face and then going to the lower left corner, clicking, hitting return. I'm going to rotate my model and do the same on the other side. Hitting return each time the path appears. I'll hit W on the keyboard to exit the tool. Be very careful with the multi-cut as well as the insert edge loop, because it will continue to drop edges if you think you're in the move tool, so be sure to hit W to exit. Now, if in the event this tool becomes a little difficult to work with initially, any of these edges can be deleted. If I want to delete an edge, I would right-click, choose edge, select the edge in question. I'll hold down the space bar, going to edit mesh, and down towards the bottom you'll see delete edge and vertex. Now the key quick, if you want to use a keyboard command, that would be it would be command delete or control delete depending on your platform. This will allow us to make the creases in the bag. So what we're going to try and accomplish now are what we see here. I'm going to go to the side view of the package, and I'm going to right click and choose vertex. I'm selecting the 4 inside horizontal rows of vertices all the way through. Now I'll go to my perspective view, and I'll hit R to get my scale, and on the x-axis I'll pull it in, and I'll turn it so I can see what I'm doing here. Now, as you're working, you may want to hit 3 on the keyboard to see what the results are. Always go back to 1 on your keyboard if you are going to continue to edit. Now I'm going to taper the bag in the side view so that our results will be something like this. Return to my side view. I'll right click and choose vertex. I'll select the top row where the opening is, and hitting R, I'll scale it on the Z-axis to pinch it at the top. I'm going to go down the geometry gradually, leaving the bottom as it is. I can select these by hand and do so, or you can use your down arrow to go to the next row of vertices. This is getting pretty subjective, so anything close to this is perfectly fine. Now if we take a look at the finished piece, we see that it's a bit pinched at the top here. I'm hitting 3 on the keyboard as I go because the smooth tool shrinks the geometry, so it helps you determine if you've edited enough or too much. Click on 1, and I think I'll close it out the top a little more. And I'm going to get the edge loop tool now and put an edge up near the top hitting R to get my scale tool, and I'll go ahead and edit that on the Z-axis. I'll return to my perspective view and hit 3 on the keyboard. Going back to my object mode, I'll deselect. Now if we look at the bag on the left, you can see it's a little bit more organic and there's a bit of a dip at the top. So we're going to use the soft select to achieve that. I'm going to go to my side view again, and I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard to return to the actual state of the geometry, and I'm going to right click and choose vertex. Now at this point you can model however you wish, but I want to grab the ones in the center down below. Perhaps there's more cocoa down lower in the bag than the top. It would be a little bit more concave or hollowed and thinner. I'm going to use a soft select though, and I'll hit B on the keyboard, and depending on how my soft select was set last time, I would need to go to the tool itself on the toolbar, double click, and I will see the option to open up the soft selection attributes. And in here I can make the number higher or low depending on what my needs might be. I have it set at 0.5. I'm going to leave it, and I'll just taper out a little bit. I'll select a single one at the top, and maybe I'll just bring that out a bit. I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard as I do this so that I can really preview what the effect might be. Now I'm going to put the dip in the top, and I'll do that through the front view of the geometry. I'll right click, choose vertex. I'll select maybe 2/3 of the very top edge, and I'll hit W on the keyboard and I'll just pull it down a bit. I'm trying not to make it too cartoonish and extreme. So now we have pretty much what we want for the bag. Now we'll go into Photoshop and we'll create the texture for it.